In my last video, we discussed some guys in the NBA that weren't exactly compared to very good players when they were drafted, and today, we're actually going to be doing something similar, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. For the topic of today's video, we'll be discussing 6 players that drew lofty comparisons to some of the best players in the league when they were drafted, only to fail to come anywhere close to meeting those expectations. These comparisons were made by national media outlets and some of the most popular NBA draft analysis websites, and it's there that I found them. The players that will be mentioned today, just like last video, will be from more recent drafts, as I have actually already made a video discussing this topic with players further back in the decade, so if you want to see those, I'll leave them linked in the description. Before we start though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. The first player that came into the league being compared to a big-time player that, looking back, now looks questionable is Justice Winslow of the Memphis Grizzlies, who was compared to James Harden. Winslow was coming off of a college national championship when he got drafted, so overall, most fans and scouts were pretty high on him and his future. But even at the time, this comparison seemed lazy and ridiculous. For starters, Harden is one of the best scoring talents the NBA has ever seen, and his plethora of go-to moves off the dribble in order to score the ball at an elite level is something very few have ever been able to replicate. To compare someone like that to a guy like Winslow, who simply was not a scorer by nature even in college, is just asinine. In all honesty, the only real similarities between the way the two play come in the fact that they're both left-handed, because outside of that, they really aren't that similar. Now, Winslow is by no means a bad player, but he's not a superstar caliber player like Harden, and his role on the teams that he's played for have mostly been as a guy capable of bringing a little bit of everything to the table while not necessarily excelling in one part of the game. Winslow can fill in as a point forward because of his underrated passing ability. He's a decent scorer who averaged about 12 points per game over the last few seasons, and he plays some solid defense. Ultimately, he'll never be James Harden or on that caliber of player in terms of production or talent, and the comparison doesn't even make sense in terms of play style. The next player that drew some pretty high praise in terms of their comparison is Markelle Fultz of the Orlando Magic, who funnily enough was also compared to James Harden by the same outlet. I'm not sure why Harden is such a common name these guys like to throw around when labeling the potential of up-and-comers, but this one at the time at least made a little more sense because of what Fultz was before the bizarre timeline of his professional career to this point. When Fultz was playing at Washington in college, he genuinely looked like the kind of guard that had everything an NBA team could want from their ball handler, and in many ways, he was Harden-esque. Fultz was a confident and comfortable scorer from all 3 levels. He had a silky smooth handle capable of breaking players down and getting to his spots, and he was also a strong playmaker for those around him, all of which do compare to the way James Harden plays. But the issue with this is that the player Fultz was in college and the player he is now are 2 completely different players. Something happened to his shoulder between his last game in college and his first game in the NBA, and that shoulder problem has hampered his ability to score the ball from the perimeter ever since. His form is wonky, he doesn't trust his shot as much, and as a result, his production has suffered. It has now been 3 years since he's been drafted, so whether or not he'll return to normal is looking more and more unlikely, and because of it, I don't think he'll ever be able to live up to the comparisons to a guy like James Harden. The next player that drew comparisons to great players when they were drafted is Josh Jackson of the Memphis Grizzlies, and the players he were compared to are Kawhi Leonard and Jimmy Butler. Leonard and Butler have been 2 of the premier wing players in the NBA for a while now, and what makes them so great is their ability to impact both ends of the floor at a high level. Additionally, both Kawhi and Jimmy started their careers as minimal impact players, and it was their work ethics and ability to steadily improve over time that got them to the top. Jackson, however, has been on an almost completely opposite trajectory, coming into the league with all of the hype in the world, and over time, failing to show much improvement. As a prospect, Jackson was seen as one of the best defensive players in the class of 2017, and while his offensive game was still in need of improvement, he had a good base to build upon. This is likely where the comparisons to Butler and Leonard came from, but he just simply hasn't been able to live up to the hype. After a relatively good good rookie season, he got worse in his second year, and now in his third season, he spent most of his time in the G League before getting recalled by the Grizzlies and playing a limited role off the bench. He's gotten in trouble off the court, it's been noted that his work ethic isn't the best, and his once promising potential just doesn't seem to be there anymore. Next up for discussion amongst the players who came into the NBA with some lofty comparisons is Mo Bamba of the Orlando Magic, who was compared to Rudy Gobert. Gobert is a two-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, one of the best rim protectors in the NBA, and his combination of size and length make him incredibly impactful on both ends when he gets around the rim. His ability to block shots, his instincts to always make the right rotations and make things difficult for the opponents to score at the basket, and pure presence in the paint have improved every year he's been in the league, so for Bamba to be on the same trajectory, you definitely would have liked to have seen some improvement from him from his first year to his second season. That, however, has not been the case, and in many ways he has regressed individually, which is worrisome to say the least for the Magic and their fans. Obviously, Bamba is still very young, and there's plenty of time for him to develop, but the Gobert aspirations seem like a bit of a reach. The one redeeming quality for Bamba so far has actually been his shot blocking, but according to his coaches, he still needs to work on keeping his intensity up, he needs to learn the proper rotations of a defensive player, and his offensive game is still very inconsistent. Gobert is the best case scenario for Bamba's development, but it just seems unrealistic. The next player that drew some pretty lofty comparisons at the time of the draft and has failed to live up to the hype is Dragan Bender of the Golden State Warriors, and his comparison was actually to Hedo Turkoglu. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Hedo Turkoglu, he was one of the best perimeter shooters in the mid-2000s and played a vital role for some very good Sacramento Kings and Orlando Magic teams, including the Magic team that went to the finals in 2009. He's a tall forward that stretched the floor and provided a very reliable secondary scoring option for teams over the years, and in Bender, some people saw a taller version of him. When he was coming into the league, his shooting ability was also his best asset, or so it seemed, and his height combined with this ability made him very intriguing, which is why he was picked 4th overall in the 2016 draft. However, as most of you already know, Bender has been a bit of a bust in the NBA, failing to break into the Phoenix Suns rotation consistently enough because of his lack of production, and then this season, he sat at the end of the Bucks bench for most of the year before they released him, and he got signed with the Golden State Warriors for a few games. His three-point shooting has now been below league average every year, and he just isn't good enough in other areas to justify playing him, so needless to say, he's not exactly comparable to a player like Hedo Turkoglu. And finally, the last player we'll be discussing that drew some pretty overblown comparisons on draft night is Stanley Johnson of the Toronto Raptors, who was compared to Kawhi Leonard and Ron Artest. This is the second time someone in this video was compared to Kawhi Leonard, and I think people just need to realize that Kawhi's development over time just isn't as easy to replicate as some people think it is. Johnson's got a strong frame and ideal height on the wing, and as a prospect, looked like someone with good enough all-around game to produce at a high level, but the thing about these draft prospects is that they're never a sure thing, and something just never clicked with Stanley Johnson. He's shown flashes of being a capable defender, and every now and then his offensive game would get going, but overall, he was just far too inefficient and inconsistent to rely upon, and now he's basically a bench warmer for the Toronto Raptors. It's been 5 years now, and he hasn't shown much improvement at all, so something tells me he won't be able to reach those Leonard and Artest levels, and more than likely will be fighting to stay in the league soon. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think of these players' comparisons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.